What's going on, guys? Welcome back. This is the next week's edition of the Joe Gaither Show on SpursCentral. You're finding us on San Antonio Spurs on SI. You're finding us on the Twitter machine at SAS on SI. I'm at Joe Gaither 6, and my friend Matt Guzman is at Matt GZ Man on the Twitter machine. And Matt has been a very, very busy man covering the San Antonio Spurs. Yes, it is the NBA offseason, but Summer League is in action. And the San Antonio Spurs are busy making a lot of moves. So we're here with Matt Guzman to talk about Harrison Ingram, another Harrison joining the lineup, and figure out what the Spurs are doing this summer. Matt, what's going on, man? How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm having a good day so far. It's a great day in Alabama. I know that you're not in Alabama. I hope the weather is very nice where you are as well.
Yeah, it's been good. I know St. Louis was actually hit pretty hard with the hurricane that's moving through, but we haven't seen it over here in Kansas City just yet. So right now it's nice and sunny and a little bit warm.
All right, so let's start with the biggest news. Last week on the program, we talked all about Chris Paul and what his addition means for the San Antonio Spurs. The Spurs made another splash, this time not in a free agent acquisition, but in a three-team trade. I love three-team trades because guys go one way, picks go another way, all kinds of assets swap all around. But the Spurs end up with Harrison Ingram and a 2031 draft pick. So tell us all about this trade. DeMar DeRozan's involved. The Chicago Bulls are involved. Sacramento Kings. Who went where, and how did the San Antonio Spurs end up with Harrison Ingram and a 2031 first-round pick?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the core of it, it all starts back in Chicago and just the mass exodus that they've been having over there. You know, they just dealt for Josh Giddey to give Alex Caruso a chance over there in the Thunder. They're looking to deal Lonzo Ball potentially. They don't know if he's going to be able to come back. That's why they got Giddey. And DeMar DeRozan was next on the docket. He was the next player that they wanted to kind of, I guess, whether they wanted to give him another chance or they just wanted him off their team. The tenure of DeRozan in the Bulls is now over, and the Kings ended up being the suitors. And so in that three-team trade, the Spurs kind of snuck their way in there. And so Chris Duarte, 2 second-round picks in cash, went to the Bulls from the Kings in exchange for DeRozan. And the Spurs were able to acquire Harrison Barnes with basically just giving up, it might have been a pick. I forget exactly what it was, but they didn't give up very many assets. They snuck Harrison Barnes in there, but they did have to clear some space on their roster to kind of fit his salary in there. So they waived Charles Bassey. They renounced the rights to David Duke Jr. and Julian Champagnie, guys like that, just to kind of make room for him. But that was ultimately the next guy that they wanted to kind of pair with Chris Paul. And like you said, three-team trades are always exciting. I know that there'd been some buzz about whether or not it'd be Kevin Huerter or Harrison Barnes that would be en route to San Antonio. But Barnes made his debut, or not his debut, but he spoke to the media for the first time today. So those guys are officially set to join the roster next season. And it looks like the Spurs front office is still doing their thing this offseason, even after the draft. So.
All right, at 6'7", former first-round draft pick, a lot of people are going to remember Harrison Barnes from his time with the Golden State Warriors, 2015 NBA champion. But he's had a nice and long career. I mean, obviously he leaves the Warriors, has a little bit of time in obscurity with the Dallas Mavericks, and now has been with the Sacramento Kings. The Kings have been one of those franchises that really since the early 2000s, not very good. But the last couple of years, they've made a little bit of noise. Harrison Barnes presents a veteran presence. He played all 82 games last year, averaging just over 12 points. So a nice little veteran player, 12 years in the league. All this is all about is about Victor Wembanyama and now Stephon Castle and the rebirth and the basically resurgence of the San Antonio Spurs. How is Harrison Barnes going to play into, hey, we got to bring along Victor Wembanyama and we got to bring along Stephon Castle and get this roster ready to contend?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, Harris, like you mentioned, he brings that veteran presence, and it seems to be the theme of this offseason. Chris Paul obviously is on one end of the spectrum with as many years as he has in the league. But Harrison Barnes is one of those guys that comes in and can kind of give you an instant boost, especially on offense. His entire time with the Kings, the lowest three-point percentage that he averaged was 37.4, just under 38%. And he shot, he hit that 40 mark. In his first season there, he didn't do it after, but he got really, really close. And so for the Spurs, who also lost Doug McDermott at the trade deadline, or I guess sent him away to the Pacers, that's somebody that can come in and fill that role, be that sharpshooter, be that veteran voice, and kind of space the floor a little bit better. And so, as the Spurs are kind of working to develop Stephon Castle as a point guard and also give Chris Paul some of those minutes at point guard next to Victor, he's a player that doesn't need to be developed. And so they can kind of stick him in there and say, hey, do your thing. And, in the locker room, he's going to be like, hey, I've been around this. I've been with the Warriors. I've seen, this championship, this very like high level basketball. Here's what I learned. Here's what I've seen. And let's see what we can do here. And so I like the move personally. He's not a huge name, one of those guys. It's not a franchise altering decision, but it really does. It's one of those picks where the Spurs got better because of it. And it just shows that they are committed to getting better. And this is a little bit more accelerated than maybe some had thought this offseason, just the fact that they went out and got 2 veterans. But I think that they're still making that progress upward. And so it's a good get overall.
All right, so I'll just get your comments on something I saw on the Twitter machine. It was probably not from a famous tweeter. But basically it was like, if the San Antonio Spurs front office is calling you for a trade, just hang up the phone. Just hang up the phone, because you're going to get taken. You're going to get taken on a ride. They're going to get the better end of the trade. What do you make of just that comment, that concept, but particularly and actually on the analytical side, what San Antonio has done, bringing in Chris Paul and now getting Harrison Barnes for virtually not a whole lot?
Right. I mean, that's just kind of how they are. And the craziest thing about it is they'll make these moves that just kind of jab at you, and then all of a sudden they've got a better roster than they did before. They're very tight-lipped. They don't like to reveal a lot about their plans and their intentions. That's why it was a surprise whenever the number 8 pick didn't end up getting used and sent over for virtually nothing to some fans. Well, obviously we'll see how that pick plays out, whether it's actually used or given another deal sometime in the future. But it's just another one of those examples. I mean, I think that the Spurs are a team, like, they're very calculating in their offseason moves. Just the fact that they were, they did waive Charles Bassey, but they're looking at re-signing him. They snuck their way into a Harrison Barnes deal, and they renounced some rights to make the cap space for him. But at the same time, they kind of knew what they were doing. They knew that was their goal in the end. They got Stephon Castle, and in his first Summer League game, which we'll get to, he looked good. They've done their research. They know exactly what they want. They know exactly how they want to go about improving. And it just kind of it opens it up for interpretation, because a lot of people just didn't really know what to expect from this front office this offseason. And so now that everything is kind of coming to fruition, it's beginning to make more sense. And obviously the idea is that next season on the court, that shows. But I could definitely see why you'd be a little wary to trade for the Spurs, or with the Spurs, because, you may not see much in Harrison Barnes if you're the Kings. You're like, yeah, sure, he's a good dude, but, maybe you're a little wary as to what they've got cooking over there in San Antonio.
All right, so on that same concept, last week we talked about Lauri Markkanen of the Utah Jazz and maybe what it might cost to get Lauri Markkanen. A lot of smoke and rumors about the Spurs being interested in him. Does the acquisition of Harrison Barnes basically wipe those talks off the table? And if so, let's compare it. Do you think the Spurs basically made a better deal by choosing to deal with the Sacramento Kings and getting Harrison Barnes over saying, okay, let's go get Lauri Markkanen from the Utah Jazz?
Sure. I think it's a hard question because, it's a good question, but it's kind of tough to answer, because it's one of those things where, next season we're going to see Harrison Barnes on the Spurs. Whether we see Lauri Markkanen next to him or not remains to be seen. If I had to personally guess, I don't think that they're going to end up going for him or making that deal for him. Them getting Harrison Barnes doesn't eliminate the chances of that happening, but they did kind of make their intentions known, like, hey, this is kind of where we're going. And perhaps the fact that they went for a guy like Harrison Barnes by jumping into a 3-team deal instead of being the headliner, by sending away Keldon Johnson or Jeremy Sohan for a big guy like Lauri Markkanen. I'm not so sure that we're going to see that this offseason, but at the same time, it's hard to compare what things would look like, because I do really like the fit of Lauri and Victor. I think that they would do very well together, but I also think that Harrison Barnes has a lot to contribute, and depending on how he does next season, we'll probably have a better gauge based on, obviously, Lauri's not going to get any worse next season, whether he's on the Jazz or the Spurs. But we'll have a better gauge of how things are going if Harrison Barnes, if he comes in and it turns out to be a swing player, an impact player, then the Spurs will have made the right decision. Sure, you could argue that they would have also made the right decision had they gone for Lauri, but they didn't, or maybe they did. And so a lot of that just is kind of up in the air. But overall, I don't think it's a bad thing that they haven't made that huge swing move for Lauri, and I don't think it'd be a terrible thing if they didn't. He'd be a huge piece and a huge get, but at the same time, next offseason, they could just as easily attract another big name to San Antonio, especially if they do improve the season the way that they're looking to do.
Absolutely. We're talking to Matt Guzman of San Antonio Spurs on SI. You can follow him at Matt GZ Man. You can follow all of San Antonio Spurs on SI at SAS on SI on the Twitter machine. We appreciate everybody who's subscribing to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon, or maybe who's watching us on the San Antonio Spurs on SI YouTube channel. We're getting that going. We've gotten some nice little views, so we appreciate everybody who has jumped in and subscribed to that channel. Let's keep going with another trade. This trade, the San Antonio Spurs trade away Devontae Graham to the Charlotte Hornets. And this makes, okay, you're going to have to educate me here because a lot of my trades are from footballers. I send you X, you send me Y. Spurs aren't getting anything from Charlotte right here. What happens? What's the thought process around trading Devontae Graham to the Charlotte Hornets?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, as simple as you can put it, it was a move to clear up some cap space, whether that be for Harrison Barnes or just in general to sign a couple more players. They just didn't see Devontae Graham being that piece for them. He's a veteran as well. He's done his rounds in the league. And I remember last season they acquired him at the trade deadline. Not last season. The season right before Victor, they acquired him at the trade deadline. He came in. He said that he was glad to be there, and it was like he was able to play free in San Antonio versus where he was before. But then Victor comes in, and the priorities shifted. The end of 2 seasons ago was really just, where are we? What pieces do we have? And where will we be drafting? They had no idea at the time when they got Devontae that they'd be in line to get Victor Wembanyama. And so at the time, he was just somebody who could come in and play some good minutes. He was averaging over 20 minutes and play free, essentially. Once Victor got into the picture, they kind of, I guess, reevaluated their, which guys they really saw being good pieces to develop alongside which guys were the most coachable. Devontae Graham, it's not a knock on him, and he just doesn't quite fit that system and the vision that they have moving forward. In the season last year, he only played about 20 games, averaged 13 minutes or so, and didn't put up very many points. And so moving forward, he just wasn't a piece that they really saw being a core producer. He wasn't that player that was going to help them win the title or really get to this place of contention. So they let him go. Wherever he signs, he was traded to the Hornets. He was waived by them. So we don't know where he's going to sign next. But you could only hope the best for him, that he can find a place where he can continue to play free and hopefully do good as well. But yeah, I think overall, just the fact that the Spurs, they got cash considerations and they got extra space on their cap room because he had a pretty hefty contract, not hefty, but a decent contract, more than you'd expect for a player that wasn't playing. So really what they got in return was not having to worry about his money.
I think I read, and maybe you wrote this, they cleared $19 million by sending him away. So that's a pretty nice little chunk of change.
Absolutely. And so, that's just another example of they're very calculating. They're okay with sending him over to Charlotte for nothing because they know that in the end that's what they want to do. And sure, some of that cap space did help land Harrison Barnes, so they had enough room to trade for him. But, it's just one of those things. They know what they're doing, and they have a very clear vision of how they want to go about it, and he just didn't quite fit that.
All right, this is screaming to me, what was it, the Brock Osweiler trade to Cleveland from Denver to Cleveland, where they almost got, a 7th-round pick, but Cleveland took on all their cap space and stuff. And obviously that didn't work out for Brock Osweiler, but it was basically a dump of a player to clear their cap space is what this is sending me.
It's exactly what it is.
What do we want to talk about Stephon Castle? Because he plays his first Summer League game. The Spurs end up losing to the Charlotte Hornets. It was 97-65. But that's not really the point of Summer League, winning and losing. The point is performing well. And Stephon Castle plays 20.5 minutes, 12 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, only 1 turnover. He's 2 of 4 from behind the line. So what did you see? I'm just reading the box score. What did you see with your own 2 eyes?
Absolutely. Well, Castle didn't go out and stuff the box score. He didn't drop 30 points. And I remember last Summer League, it was Julian Champagny, it was Dominic Barlow, who were putting up 20, 30-point games consistently. Castle didn't go out and do that, but he didn't need to. What the Spurs, this entire time, what they've been hoping to see from him is that point guard tendency. He didn't quite play that at UConn because he didn't need to, but they want him to play that here in San Antonio. And so, that's why they got him. They saw that potential for him to be a point guard, to be a facilitator, and that's what they saw in summer league. He only had one turnover. He looked very solid, very confident in his shot, very confident in finding his spots and getting open, creating space. He looked very natural on the floor. And, while that might not exactly be like, obviously this is summer league competition, he would probably have a much worse outing if he went against a full-fledged NBA roster. But this is very, very good potential for game one of summer league, because he showed exactly what he needed to show, that he can be a point guard, that he can be decisive, that he's confident, and that he has all this potential to just continue to develop as they get better. And so I think I liked what I saw from Castle. I think he showed exactly what he needed to. They didn't even feel the need to put him in, they didn't list him on the roster for the Kings. And so we'll see what happens with him tonight in China, or not in China, but against China. But either way, he showed exactly what he needed to do. I think that they've got a good one.
All right, so let's compare something real quick. We talked about the NBA draft and the potential San Antonio Spurs targets, and one of the main other targets that we talked about was Reed Sheppard. Reed Sheppard drafted just before Stephon Castle with the Houston Rockets, drafted the third. Are San Antonio and their fans going to be very, very happy if we fast forward 12 months from now with the performance of Stephon Castle versus what Houston might have in Reed Sheppard? And I don't want to disparage Reed Sheppard. I think he's going to be a quality player. But I think that maybe the Spurs, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, I think the Spurs might have ended up with a better, more complete player.
Absolutely. I mean, Reed Sheppard's a great scorer. He's a guy that is going to go in and learn from those Rockets and really, hone his skills. But like I was saying, I think Stephon Castle, at the end of the day, the fact that he was able to play shooting guard at UConn and then kind of come over here and say, okay, I need to be a point guard now, and show those tendencies the correct way. It didn't look like he was Jeremy Sohan trying to learn how to play point guard. It looked like he was a point guard just relearning and re-finding that groove that he once had in high school as that playmaker that the Spurs saw when they were scouting him then. So I do think he's got a very complete skill set. I think that, he's not going to be the player that scores 30 points every night, but he's going to be the player that fits the system that the Spurs exactly want. And maybe Reed Sheppard would have gone out and scored more. Maybe he will score more than Stephon. But like you were saying, Stephon has those tendencies and other attributes of his game, the passing, the facilitating, the confidence, something that you can't coach. That makes him not only a good fit, but a great player and somebody that can succeed in the NBA. And I could see that very well panning out next season, that he ends up, maybe he's not scoring as many as Reed Sheppard. Maybe he is, and that'd be even better. But I do think that he will do a lot for the Spurs, and he will do exactly what they need him to do, versus Reed Sheppard's really just going to kind of come in and see what he can do.
All right, let's spin it back to last week just a little bit when we talked about Chris Paul. Chris Paul had his introductory press conference pretty recently. I think this was today. So this morning. And basically announced revealed that he chose playing time over ring chasing. And obviously we're not unfamiliar with where the Spurs are as a franchise. It'd be a huge surprise for the Spurs to be competing for a championship next year. Well, what do you make about a veteran at 38, 39 years old saying, okay, yeah, I maybe would rather be playing a lot of minutes instead of being on a team that is competing for a championship?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's kind of the thing that has plagued Chris Paul in the last few years of his career. He goes over to Phoenix with Kevin Durant, and everybody accuses him of ring chasing because they expect the Suns to be in contention. And he goes over to the Warriors, and they accuse him of ring chasing because Steph Curry and Klay Thompson are going to continue their dynasty, and they're going to win another championship. He doesn't accomplish that goal with either of those franchises. And at this point in his career, he's not the player that will give you that chance. He's not the player that you bring in knowing that he's the piece that'll take you to the championship. He's still a very good point guard. He's a veteran. He's truly a great basketball player. He always has been. But he's not that swing piece anymore. And so, sure, he could have chosen to go to the Clippers or gone to the Philadelphia 76ers, somewhere else that he probably would have had a better chance of contending this season. He's only got a few seasons left, I'm sure. But for him to it kind of settles that narrative for him. Sure, maybe he was ring chasing, but at the end of the day, what he wants to do is play basketball. And the quote he had is he just wants to hoop. He wants to go out and be that player for the Spurs that gets minutes, that shows exactly who Victor Wembanyama can be but also prove that he's still got the point guard in him. He's still that great player that can go out and impact a game and run a floor and run an offense. And so it's honestly really admirable for him to kind of say, like, look, I know that we're not going to get a ring next season. What I want is to play basketball. And what I want to do is improve this team and do what I can for them. And so honestly, I think that bodes well for him. We'll see if he does end up getting a ring in his NBA career, whether that's in San Antonio or whether that's somewhere else. But at the end of the day, he's kind of shown that, he loves the sport of basketball. And while it'd be great to get a championship, and he definitely did try with all these organizations he's been a part of, he's kind of putting that aside, and he just wants to get back to playing basketball.
All right, so we're hanging out with Matt Guzman of San Antonio Spurs on SI. You can follow him at MattGZMan. One other kind of outside the box topic with NBA was Cooper Flagg taking over all kinds of social media yesterday. Cooper Flagg is going to Duke this coming season, and obviously the Duke Blue Devils, great basketball tradition. But let me ask you what you think that the impact of these highlights have on NBA front offices, and then furthermore, what we're going to see out of him as a freshman. Will this cause teams to say, okay, we're going to have as bad of a season as possible to get as many balls in the bucket because we want to get involved in the Cooper Flagg sweepstakes? Obviously, that wasn't exactly the Spurs mindset when they ended up with the number 1 overall pick to get Victor Wembanyama, but it did not hurt. Can we rule out San Antonio saying, okay, we want to have some balls in that bucket as well? And then what do you think about the rest of the league when they see these highlights and then what they will see this year out of Cooper Flagg and Duke?
Sure. I think that Cooper Flagg is definitely going to be the next great prospect. He's going to be the front runner for Rookie of the Year in his draft class. He's going to kind of take the league by storm. He's not quite as tall as Victor. He's not the unique frame, but he's got a great skill set. And from what I saw of his highlights over at the USA Basketball playing for that select squad, he looked very, very well-rounded already. He looked like not a finished product, but well on his way to being that. And I think that what he shows to NBA franchises is that this is a player that can come in and not only, play good basketball, but he can actually really impact your team right away. The way that Victor Wembanyama really forget the fact that he was Rookie of the Year. He was averaging over 20 points. And for any player in the NBA, that is somebody that is affecting your team positively. And so he's a player that can come in and do that. I think in his freshman season at Duke is going to be really telling. But at the same time, these franchises already know what they're getting. I don't think, if Duke is a first-round exit in the NCAA tournament, they're not going to hurt his draft stock. But I think that they're going to expect for him to kind of get his shots up. But the games are played very differently, college and NBA. And so they're not going to be too hung up on his stats. They're just going to kind of see, how does he perform in these kinds of situations? How can he space a floor? How can he play down low? How can he play outside? And they're going to kind of finish out their scouting. But for the most part, they know what they're getting in him. And every team knows that they, if they can, they're going to want him. I don't think the Spurs will ever admit it, but they definitely wouldn't mind having Cooper Flagg next to Victor. I also don't think that they're hoping to be nearly that in that position. I definitely won't have them tanking next season for him. But at the same time, I don't think you can rule out anything because, this is a guy that is going to come in and definitely will change whichever NBA franchise he ends up going to. He will change the trajectory of them. There will be a lot of teams that will be tanking, or at least, disguising the fact that they're losing a little bit easier. Like I said, I don't think the Spurs will be nearly that bad next season. But at the same time, you can never rule anything out.
I'll hang out with Matt Guzman, and he's got to get ready for Spurs versus China tonight. Little summer league action. So tell everybody what you're going to be working on as summer league continues, and how they can follow your coverage with San Antonio.
Sure. Well, I just finished up a piece on DJ Horn, one of the Spurs summer leaguers. He kind of gave me a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look of what being part of summer league looks like. What are the goals? What are the intentions behind these players that are on these rosters? So I did that one. That Trey Jones piece should be coming out this week, so you can go ahead and tune into that. But at the same time, now that this California Classic is about to wrap up and we're going to head into 2K25 NBA Summer League in Vegas, we'll have some more coverage on that, what you can expect, some of what's already been happening, including a 31-year-old video coordinator who's now the head coach of the Spurs Summer League. Very reminiscent of Eric Spoelstra's kind of his journey to being an NBA head coach. So the Spurs got some things brewing in their Summer League squad. So just stay tuned on Spurs on SI, si.com/NBA/Spurs. It's burned in my memory now. So.
Well, that's great. Hey, I want to hear about that video coordinator next week, the head coach, the new head coach of the Spurs Summer League team. So we'll talk about him next week. That's a great story. I saw just a snippet of that over the weekend, and I want to find out a bit more about him next week. Let's talk about him next week on the Joe Gaither Show on Spurs Central.
Absolutely.
You guys need to hang out with Matt Guzman at MattGZMan on the Twitter machine. Follow all of his coverage of the San Antonio Spurs at SAS on SI on the Twitter machine. Or if you're just looking at Google, just type Spurs SI. It'll be the first link that comes up, and you can follow everything that Matt Guzman does. Matt, thanks for your time, man. Enjoy the game tonight.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me as always.
Absolutely. That's Matt Guzman joining us, and we appreciate you joining us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. We appreciate you subscribing to the SpursCentral YouTube channel. It's brand new. We got a handful of videos out there. We will continue to put the show on that YouTube channel each and every week. We appreciate Matt Guzman. He makes us a whole lot smarter as the Spurs are making their way through the offseason. We'll figure out what that final roster will look like for the 2024-2025 season. We'll be back next week to hear about that head coach who's worked his way through the video coordinator department, and we'll find out how the Spurs are continuing their summer league right here on the Joe Gaither Show on Spurs Central and Spurs Central SI.